So check out this post I made last week. It got 4 million views, tons and tons of hate comment, people reaching out to the dean of my university, to my head of school, my supervisors, asking me to be expelled from the PhD. Everybody was so angry because the post was about academic writing and using AI for academic writing. That's a very sensitive topic right now. But how far is too far? Like, what is ethical? And I think a lot of this rage is actually a misunderstanding. Because check out this graph here. If you write something with ChatGPT, many people will consider that unethical. I agree. But at the same time, if you write with ChatGPT, you are incredibly fast. If you write it manually, you are slow. So these two curves meet somewhere here in the middle, and that is the sweet spot. This is what I want to find out in the video. This discussion is absolutely essential. Look at this Nature study that was looking at how much LLM is used to write papers. Among computer science preprints, the ratio is somewhere at 22% right now, and the trend is not going anywhere. So regardless which discipline you belong to, you will have to address that issue somehow. The technology is already here, but the rules are not. And if we can't agree on the rules, we'll start pointing fingers at one another, become really angry, and so on. But all of that is actually tied to a much deeper reality, and that is publish or perish. If your PhD, your job, your grant, whatever, depends on how much you write and how much you produce, you will always take the shortcut that gives you more paper in a shorter amount of time. And this is what those people in the LLM modified studies are doing. They are just using shortcuts. To find out what is actually ethical, I decided to look at my university's ethical guidelines for using generative AI. Here is what it says. Members of the university community conducting or supervising AI research are free to use all generative AI technologies, including those developed initially at the university for research purposes, provided they comply with this policy, the acceptable use of information systems, responsible research policy, human ethics policy, intellectual privacy policy, and so on. The problem here is that it doesn't really give me a clear guidance. All these previous policies, they have been in place before AI. So all that thing is doing is telling me, do whatever you have been doing, but now with AI. And that just doesn't work. That's not real guidance. We need some examples. We need to understand what is actually AI. Because AI can mean so many things to so many people. And moreover, I don't think that any undergrad will actually read these 300 pages of legal documents to understand what they can do and cannot do. And the clearest definition I've found so far comes from Stanford. The use or consultation with generative AI shall be treated analogously to assistance from another person. That makes it much more accessible because now you have an intuitive understanding of what that means. Because a lot of scientific knowledge rests on talking to other people, sharpening your ideas. But at the same time, if that other person starts doing the work for you, it becomes quite unethical because it's not your work anymore. And that is the key. What you have written. Can you tell me exactly why each sentence is there? Why each reference is placed there? What are you logically trying to express here, and how do those things fit together? And if you can't, you have lost your cognitive sovereignty. So cognitive sovereignty is actually a central topic, which just means that everything you write is under your intention, your control, your authorship. So you are completely central to that piece of work. Armed with that principle of cognitive sovereignty and the idea that AI is an assistant, we can now develop a more coherent framework of what ethical AI actually means in academic writing. The way I see it is it has 4 phases. The ideation phase, the what to write phase, the how to write phase, and then the polishing phase. That distinction, I think, is essential because I use AI can mean any of those things. And if you use AI to write entire paragraphs, it's unethical. While if you use it to just polish your text a little, it's usually considered 100% ethical. That's where the controversy and the hate comes from. Because if I say one thing, but you assume another thing, obviously we're talking about different things. And a quick disclaimer, that's not legal advice. Read your own university's policies. It might differ. And if you're an undergrad, your policy might differ from a PhD student policy. Just because in the PhD you produce a paper, there's a peer review, and that paper is a little bit of a means to an end. while in undergrad, it's a means in itself. You just have to learn the process of writing. So it's essential that you do the writing manually because otherwise it defies the purpose. While in the PhD, it's a little bit more pliable. Let's start with phase one. Phase one is the ideation phase. And the question is, how can we use AI to harness our creativity or to enhance our creativity? Here's an example that I had with SciSpace. I tell it that I have some data and I wanted to analyze the literature surrounding that data, suggest 10 papers I could write that would be novel, and make sure the research is high impact. It will take some time to run through all of this, but then the result is actually something quite usable because it's an output document that gives me the literature analysis on hundreds of papers and then starts suggesting papers that may or may not make sense. So in all honesty, most of that is garbage. So most of that is just speculation based on words, but some of these things will sparkle your ideas. So even if AI tells you vaccines cause autism, what you can do is take that and transform that into a question. What are the neurological effects or long-term effects of childhood vaccination? And then you can go to consensus, for example, and ask that question to get real research on the topic. Here's how it looks. Just going to paste my question into consensus. And after a little bit, it will analyze a few papers and tell me roughly what the field thinks about that, giving me all the different papers and allowing me to actually dive into the literature, even giving me some sort of consensus meter saying that the majority of studies thinks it's not the case, but there is actually one study that says it might be a possibility. So whether or not that relates to your field, you are able to use that absurd idea to generate some new questions that you might be interested in, and then look at them with other AI tools, generating actual papers that with one click you can access and screen for your own benefit. That will make you faster. That's why I think AI actually accelerates your thinking at this point. And since you're treating AI really as a sparrings partner, generating maybe some absurd ideas and using your own mind to transform them into research question, you are in a good way using AI ethically. So not only is it ethical, it's also highly beneficial for you. So when it comes to how much AI I should use in that phase, I would give it a pretty high score somewhere up here. Now we're coming to phase two, and phase two is about what to write, kind of the scaffold, the logical argument. If you use AI to tell you what to write, you're completely losing your cognitive sovereignty. You're not the author anymore of what you're writing. So outsourcing this factual part of your research, in my experience and understanding, is 100% unethical and also impractical. Because AI will always confirm both sides of whatever you put into it. I made this experiment myself with consensus, and I asked it two conflicting arguments. And the result is that AI will try to find evidence for whatever your opinion is and just reinforce your bias. That's not real research, right? That will always take you off course. And at the same time, you're 100% liable for what you write. AI will not take responsibility. It's a little bit like if you have a dog and that dog bites someone, it's usually the owner's responsibility, even though the dog also acted as its own self. But you are responsible because you are having that AI dog on the leash. But secondly, you will also waste your potential because novel insight comes from a mind that's saturated with information. When Newton saw that apple falling, and then he had the idea that the moon and gravity and all of these things, how they work together, that can only happen if all this knowledge is already uploaded to your mind. And if you use the AI to process that, it happens outside of your mind and you can't leverage your intuitive, your subconscious. And that's why instead I always choose to rely on my notes where I have about 500,000 of words. It's all is organized around short sentences that give me something factual and then back it up with a reference. The cool thing is that now I can take all these notes and I can use AI later to create an argument that is 100% controlled by me because all the factual things are in my note-taking collection. But at the same time, they are not in academic English. They are often not even in English at all. And that doesn't matter for AI. So this combination of controlling the narrative, deep reading, note-taking, and outsourcing stylistic parts to the AI is what I consider the most ethical balance. And I think this is what caused the outrage, because academics always see that part of understanding in danger when they think about AI. Oh, we're losing our ability to think. Like, no, if you use AI correctly, you actually don't. And you actually enhance your ability to think and you become more creative, right? If you don't understand that difference, then of course the result is outrage. Therefore, I would judge that the involvement of AI in the part of understanding your subject matter should always be minimal. And that will ensure that you are a good academic with good standards and that you also leverage your subconscious. But now we are moving to phase 3. This is where you turn your structured notes into academic writing. And I think ethically, it's a little bit of a gray zone. And I'll show you why. Because I think my approach and the approach of many people is to start with something that looks like this. You want to write a paragraph and you say, this is my topic sentence. That's the thing I want to answer. And then you follow it up with a bunch of short notes or short bullet points about what you actually are trying to address. That is not academic English, but I can take all of these things and throw it into AI to get somewhat of a first paragraph. In my understanding, that is still ethical, because if I were to ask 3 academics to string those bullet points together, they would pretty much agree on what comes out, minus some stylistic differences that we probably will polish out in the duration of the writing process. So AI is translating ideas. And in that case, it might be translating it to an academic paragraph, but it can also translate it into a pamphlet or into a presentation or into a poster. So the same ideas become different things. That's why AI is merely translating and not really creating new knowledge, and my cognitive sovereignty remains untouched. And here's how something like that might look. So I ask AI to write something up and then it creates a paragraph. That paragraph, honestly, is at best a 6 out of 10, probably even less. So what I can do then is give it a little bit of a scaffold. Try this and then that and then that. Like give it a logical outline to refine that paragraph. Between each of these steps, I will go manually through these paragraphs. I will add the references. I will refine these things. I will see what comes out of it. Because the problem with AI is not so much that it's wrong. The problem will be more that it's vague, that the arguments are wishy-washy somehow, and people will notice. Yeah, so people will notice. So you have to heavily edit what you find as an output. And then you can still continue adding these paragraphs and asking it, for example, well, could you work that other sentence into my paragraph? Again, the meaning will not change because the meaning of my paragraph and the meaning of this additional sentence I want to use, all of that is maintained. Just the stylistic glue in between the verbs and adjectives, this is what AI will do. Still, how ethical that is actually depends on how much cognitive work you're doing and how well you control the narrative. That's why I call it an ethical gray zone, because depending on your personal way of doing academia, your inputs to the AI, it may be completely unethical or it might be 100% ethical, right? So if you just ask AI to change a few words, no harm in that. But if you just give it 3 bullet points and then it should write a paragraph, then of course it's unethical. So here, just be really mindful and put as much cognitive work as possible, leverage your notes, and then you should be on the safe side. So my grade here would be to use AI moderately, but not completely skip it, especially if English is not your first language and especially if you struggle with academic writing as a whole. Just use it to create first drafts and then chisel out the details and really iterate and iterate until it feels like your own words, even though the substrate, this marble that you chisel out the statue of, even if that is AI generated, the end result will not be anymore. And that effectively brings us to the last part, which is the polishing part. So once you have your paragraph, tools like Grammarly, they will suggest things like this here, where it just moves a little bit words around and makes the whole prose a little bit more subtle. If you care about that, then by all means, go ahead and do it manually. There's no harm in that. And that's actually useful if you try to write something opinionated, personal, and so on. But I think in my domain, and for me personally, I don't really care so much about how it is written. I much more care about what is the content of it, what is the data, what are the results, is the logic clear? And I think that's also why the most involvement of LLMs happens in computer science, because the more on the engineering spectrum you are, the more you will be interested in the facts, while the more you go into humanities and maybe some politics, the more opinion you can have and the more speculation you can have, where language actually helps you communicate something much clearer. So be mindful of that and set your own boundary more or less here. I personally choose to set it pretty high and just almost blindly trust what Grammarly is doing, because it doesn't really change whatever it is saying. And once the first colleague or co-author looks in this, they will rearrange it. And if it's another colleague or co-author, they will rearrange it in a different way. So who's to say one is better than the other? I don't know. You be the judge. Let's summarize it now a little bit. AI involvement will be different in different stages of your process, with different implications for the ethics of the whole thing. In the ideation phase, it can help you generate new ideas if you are able to transform whatever claims AI makes into valid research questions and use maybe another AI tool to search for the papers and dig into it. But once you get to the point of reading papers, AI use should be minimized, because that helps you upload all the information into your mind, leverage your subconscious mind, take notes, do all of that diligently, and you can actually leverage all that work that goes into it later with AI without losing the control of the narrative. And then in the third part, where you're trying to figure out how to say something, that's where AI becomes a bit of a gray zone. And the more cognitive work you put into it, the better the output, because you can control the narrative by giving AI more context, more guardrails, and just using it as a train that moves along the tracks that you have laid. It cannot steer away. That's what you're aiming for. And as long as those rails are built on your conscious knowledge, everything will be fine. And finally, with the polishing part is a little bit of a personal opinion. If you care about how something is written, polish it manually, make it your own. If you care about the facts, then just outsource it to AI. And the analogy to remember is that if you bake a bread and you use your electric mixer, probably nobody will notice at the end if you use the mixer or if you kneaded the dough by hand. But people will notice if you screw up the ingredients. That's exactly the same with academic writing. So retain your full cognitive sovereignty, but don't obsess with style so much. Because think about it, in the future, more and more people will also use AI to read and skim your papers. So what you're writing might not even be relevant, because it will be then transformed into some other language or format that the person consumes your paper in. And remember the rule of thumb, the more cognitive work you do, the more AI you can safely use. But back to the beginning, why did my post actually get so much flack? I think it's because people disagree what AI use actually means. We assume if someone is using AI, they're either fully automating everything or using it in some more ethical ways. But the truth is much, much more subtle. And right now we have a lot of freedom to define that line. But we also have the obligation to define that line collectively. And it is indeed a paradigm shift that requires rethinking. I want to share with you one of my favorite hate comments that I feel really exemplifies this entire problem. Here is a person that sends a message to his most impressionable followers that my branding is idiotic and that whatever is effortless is likely to be worthless. That type of thinking, I think, is completely anachronistic. So it's out of date. And that comment over here is what made me realize this. Just like weightlifting, you will not get strong if it's easy. This is true. I agree. But it's also true if somebody were to point a gun at you, that your muscles would not be very useful. And AI is one such technology, like electricity, like the combustion engine, like gunpowder, that levels the playing field and it changes the rules by which the game is played. So inexperienced, novice authors might soon produce more than seasoned academics because they use AI. And that gap will only widen over time. So, Mr. Bessis, do your laundry by hand and then tell me that your washing machine was worthless all that time. I don't think that's true. So I think the reason why a senior academic feels the need to attack students who use AI is actually very different, because it's systemic. And let's look at history. When Martin Luther translated the Bible in the 16th century from Latin into German, he was accused of heresy. because suddenly that arcane knowledge became available to everybody and could be interpreted by everybody how they wanted. Anyone who could read had access to this sacred material. The church was losing control. And effectively, that's what AI is doing to academic English. Some AI tools make reading papers very easy, others make writing them very easy. And I wouldn't be surprised if in a decade, writing papers could be done by hobbyists without degrees, because all of that becomes so available. And so, to the academics who are raging against my post, I understand that you are angry, but you're not angry. You're actually scared because the world is changing. You may think that AI is the death of thought, but I think AI is the rebirth of how information is communicated. And that shaking shift will leave no building standing. So understandably, you are scared right now and you are outraged and you want to keep things how they are. But instead of hate comments, why don't we have a civil discussion? Because as academics, we owe it to ourselves that new information, new methods change the way we see the world. Has always been the premise of academia. AI is not an opinion. It's a challenge that we have to solve together. How do we use it without atrophying our knowledge? How do we ensure that scientific progress accelerates rather than slows down? So I've presented to you my framework after rigorously working with AI for over 3 years, or as long as it was available, basically. You can agree, you can disagree, you can create your own framework. Right now, not even a university can clearly tell you what you need to do. So given that rapid evolution, we are the ones who have to decide what the future of AI in academia looks like. So please comment how you see how AI fits into your workflows, what you think is the ethical boundary. I've presented to you with just my opinion because I spend a lot of time thinking about these things. But of course, there are different opinions. So let's have a civil discussion about what actually constitutes the ethical use of AI in academia.